Hi, I'm Nikki Henderson, staff writer with GovCIO Media and Research, and welcome to GovCast. I will be speaking with Pete Waterman, the director of the Federal Risk and Authorization Management Program, also known as FedRAMP, at the General Services Administration. Hello, Pete. Thanks so much for joining me today.
How's it going?
Pretty good, pretty good. So, Pete, can you start off by talking about your past experiences at U.S. Digital Service and serving as TMF's Senior Technical Advisor? How has this prepared you for your current role?
I think probably a significant amount of that is just culture. I came into government after 20 years in the private sector doing tech as a cloud and technology advisor with US Digital Service. And well, let's just say I grew up overseas. I spent a lot of my life overseas, and it was a culture shock coming into government, just like going to another country. They use the same words, they say the same things, but they all mean something different.
Right.
And it was just kind of mind-boggling seeing that, and then learning how the priorities that drove people, the rules, and the environment was just entirely so different. So for me at the US Digital Service, I ended up embarking on a series of projects across a whole bunch of different agencies. I think by the time I left there, I had worked at over 20 different agencies, been credentialed at 6, and just dug in on all these technology projects. So I ended up coming to the Technology Modernization Fund as a way to kind of expand that a bit more at the executive level. I had been coming in to advise executives on how to implement, but what about planning projects before they started? So the Technology Modernization Fund was honestly like an incubator for FedRAMP in a lot of ways for me because it exposed me directly. I had already worked at the Office of Management and Budget, but now I was working on the other side at GSA, working with the Office of Management and Budget on a high priority project with the Office of the Federal CIO. I worked with a board. The TMF board is very similar in law to the FedRAMP board, kind of the only two boards of their kind, and had a bunch of OMB policies and rules and the law that specifically said how the Technology Modernization Fund needed to operate. And so that just gave me this framework across everything in government, how government does technology, how the culture handles cloud technology, how it adopts things, as well as how things get done in government. What happens when OMB puts out a memorandum and the trickle down effects of how that affects agencies, as well as literally the only other experience you can have in the government working with a technology program at GSA that is accountable to a board. And I think all of that just really nailed me up for the FedRAMP director position in a way that when I came in, there was a very, very small amount of things that I had to learn. Whereas I had done everything that this job has to do. So it was just a matter of taking what I already knew in my career and applying that to this new position in a way that's pretty unique. And for me, I was particularly excited about it because I knew when I left GSA the first time that I would never find a job where I would use all of that experience. My
Mhm.
private sector experience, my technology experience, my delivery experience, my government experience, like all that. I knew that I was going to lose some of it until I got offered this job. And it's probably the only job in the world where I get to apply almost everything I've done in my career every day. So it's pretty awesome.
Wow, that sounds awesome. What an incredible journey. Thanks so much for sharing that. I appreciate it. Well, Pete, can you outline the vision for FedRAMP and what are some of the top priorities for this year?
And the vision at a high level is really quite simple.
Mhm.
It's that the government deserves and should have access to the same technology that every other business, every other person has. And historically, FedRAMP has kind of acted as a gatekeeper that prevented technology from coming into government by way of enforcing rules and policies. You can't be successful at bringing technology into government when your job is kind of to keep technology out, right? It's a little bit of a conflict of interest. So M2415, the memorandum that modernized FedRAMP was released just over a year ago. It really drew this policy goal, this policy vision that rather than being a gatekeeper, FedRAMP would create a process that would allow businesses, commercial businesses, to bring their technology into government in a way that let government understand what are the security risks, how is it implemented, and make decisions appropriately about whether or not to deploy that technology. And like, it sounds crazy at a year when we are breaking all authorization records by like factor of 2. And yet the goal outlined in that memo a year ago was thousands of cloud services entering the FedRAMP marketplace, whereas today we have less than 500. So the vision is just rethinking FedRAMP, rebuilding it as a process that shepherds technology companies and technology services into the government, while also making sure that we have the information that we need to ensure that they're secure. So from a priority standpoint, that is the priority, right? Is authorizing services. 90% of my team every day, that's what they come in and do. They are authorizing services. They are reviewing systems, assessing them, authorizing them. And then the rest of us, we're working on the process, how to improve it, how to make it better. And that's our priority.
What progress have you seen with the FedRAMP program since you became director? And what are some of the challenges that you faced?
From a progress perspective, the most exciting thing for me has been transitioning FedRAMP as a program from the old FedRAMP to the new FedRAMP. And this is like a really weird thing. Basically, a month before I started, OMB released a new memo that rescinded all of the policy for FedRAMP in the past and created a whole new program. Effectively, it's the FedRAMP that I interviewed with versus the FedRAMP that I started at was an entirely different program, different expectations, different policy backgrounds, different authorities. And in government, at the Technology Modernization Fund, especially, I had this really fascinating opportunity to see how those policies get implemented at agencies and how it is usually really difficult and really, really slow. And so as we started to build out FedRAMP, this new FedRAMP that was supposed to do things entirely differently, but we still had all of this old stuff that the previous policies had said FedRAMP was supposed to do. And it was really difficult to kind of align as a program, as GSA with Office of Federal CIO and OMB, like how do we balance the resources are the same.
Mhm.
Now we have to do all of this other stuff. How do we still do all of this old stuff that we're not supposed to do and we kind of don't have the authority to do anymore? Like, how does that work? That was the thing that has progressed more than anything else. I mean, it's
I see.
just under a year later. It's a year from the memo. It's just under a year from when I started. And by January, February, under the new administration, we just had this really strong push of like, we get it that it's complicated and hard. And there was a lot of old stuff that people sort of expect FedRAMP to do. But we want FedRAMP to focus on this new stuff, this new policy, the new authorities, the new stuff that we want you to deliver, do that. And so that's like the single biggest point of progress is literally being given the authority and the support and the direction to focus on modernization and not try to do that while also carrying a bunch of older stuff before that kind of didn't fit in a new program and didn't make sense. And I mean, from a challenge perspective, right now that remains my core challenge. We run a program that is an entirely different thing, but has the same name as something else. And people learned what it was, how it worked, what it was supposed to do over the course of the almost 15 years that it existed before it changed. And they have that expectation that stakeholders want it to do the same stuff that it used to do. They want it to be the same way. They don't want anything to change. And like that becomes a challenge of navigating, how do we make sure that people can see the changes are positive, that we minimize the negative impact on people as we make those changes, but also like we have to go. We have to improve. We can't just sit around and wallow in pity for, how things work. We have to move forward. And so by far the biggest challenge is just walking that line with stakeholders and using delivery, using successful execution to show that we're going to make the changes they want. It might not be the way that they expected a year ago or 2 years ago. We might be doing different things than we said we would do 2 years ago, but we're still going towards the same outcome, which is ensuring that these cloud services are secure and available to federal agencies.
Perfect. Perfect. Yes, you do need change and progress is good, definitely. Well, earlier this year, GSA announced FedRAMP 20x, which was very exciting. So, how will this latest approach help advance cloud as well as improve security?
So it's kind of maybe a little cliche, especially in government for a while, talking about modernization, to say things like a paradigm shift or something like that. But
Mhm.
like that's really what FedRAMP 20x is conceptually. Instead of trying to take what is currently being done and improve it incrementally, it was how do we start from scratch and not achieve the same outcome, but achieve an exponentially better outcome. So you can't just improve something to make it 50 times better. You have to start over. And so that's what FedRAMP 20X is. And it's really found on that core principle in M2415 of encouraging and enabling commercial cloud services to use their own best in practice capabilities to provide innovative solutions. And before it was sort of the government likes it this way, you need to do it that way. And what happened was commercial companies would spin off government focused versions of their products. Next thing you know, the government has something that gets patched once every, new features once a year. Commercial versions get new features every couple of weeks. Like it's just a horrible problem. And I think that we really saw that happen with AI capabilities over the last couple of years, where all of these commercial cloud services had access to so many AI tools, while those same tools were not available to anyone in the government. So
Uh,
the whole approach, right, is about how does a best in class commercial company that is selling their services to banks, Fortune 500 companies, et cetera, how do they do security? What is their approach? How can we draw almost like a translation between their approach and the government approach? Instead of saying, no, you have to do it the government way, we created a concept that's based on almost being like a concierge. Like, oh, you do it this way here, very well. And we can come over to the government, like they do it this way, and be that translator in the middle. And that's really what 20X is based around. As far as how it helps improve security, like I was so excited about like the concept. We've talked about automation in the security world forever. Like automation is something that's really hard. I spent most of my career doing automation, automating things that people said, you can't automate that. But if a computer is doing it, you can automate that. And in a modern world, anyone that is deploying a cloud service on top of another cloud service, it is computers. It's computers all the way down. Like
yeah.
a human is clicking a button in a user interface that goes and tells the computer to do something. And if you just take humans out of the loop when it comes to assessing that, like, why do I look over the shoulder of someone and they say, okay, look at what happens when I click this button, click, see, it's safe. That doesn't mean anything. Just let the computers tell it. And so if we focus on that aspect of like how we assess security, let's assess what can the computers tell us about the decisions that the humans made using the computers. And it sounds so silly, but it's really everything. So we start to take humans out of the loop, which means that computers can look at it faster. They can report continuously. Right now in FedRAMP, we have this concept of continuous monitoring, which means you have a yearly assessment and maybe some monthly check-ins. That's not continuous. That's periodical, right?
Right.
So we want to move towards continuous, where a computer is literally checking this all of the time. It could be every 10 seconds, it could be every 30 minutes, but in a thing that is real. Move towards the situation where when somebody changes something in a way that it creates a security risk, that is automatically detected, resolved, reset immediately. No humans involved. Like that's continuous. So the 20X approach is focused entirely on that concept of taking the technology and automation and the commercial best practices and innovative solutions that people build right now to make sure that their systems scale and respond to technology needs from their customers, apply that towards security, apply that towards how we assess security. And we really hope that one of the near-term outcomes will be that it just makes sense. FedRAMP just makes sense. It's a thing that people want to do because it will help them architect their services in a way that makes sense. And then businesses just do it get FedRAMP authorized and the government can use them. It's not like a whole decision. Do we spin up? Do we hire a bunch of people? Do we build like a new engineering organization, a new compliance organization just to sell to the government? No. Do we do the right thing from a security standpoint? Yes. Therefore, you qualify for FedRAMP.
Right. Awesome. Awesome. Well, Pete, what steps has FedRAMP taken to expand the size and diversity of the marketplace as well as simplify the process?
Like conceptually, the current FedRAMP process is optimized for an established company that has successful revenue streams and is willing to take a risk on investing a significant amount of money up front to go through a security process and build a separate product for the government, such that maybe, if they're lucky, they might be able to get government business. And it might take years for them to get a return on that investment, right? Whereas if you build a FedRAMP around a process, an architecture, best practices that make sense, then none of that investment is necessary. Now you have small companies. These are one of the specific goals of FedRAMP 20x. Like in my direction, I was directed a startup that has a couple successful customers, does security well, should be able to sell to the government. And if we can get to that place, then it's almost like that's the biggest gap right now is between a small startup that doesn't necessarily have a lot of funding, that can't take risks in building out a new thing for the government. If they can get through FedRAMP and get authorized and sell to the government, then it means any other cloud service provider can do the same thing. And we've just opened up the market to everyone. So by focusing on that use case of that like small kind of vulnerable population there that we can target for improvements, everybody else will benefit from those improvements. A huge multi-billion-dollar company can transition into FedRAMP with the same level of ease as that small startup.
Well, Pete, are there any future initiatives that you're excited to talk about?
All of this is the future. I think I say this really seriously. Like it's fascinating, especially in industry. You spend a lot of your time focusing on like near horizon. I
Mhm.
don't think I ever, in my 20-year technology career, ever mapped out more than a 5-year plan. Like
Mm.
even a 3-year plan was pretty long term, right? It was usually 1 year, 2 year. But here we are right now in 2025. And one of the things we're literally working on with the Federal Secure Cloud Advisory Committee and with the public is
Mm.
this idea of plans of actions and milestones. How do we improve plans of actions and milestones, which is a complicated part of the FedRAMP process that's bespoke to government? And it's based on a memo written in the year 2000. 25 years ago, a
Wow.
memo that required a spreadsheet have certain columns in it is something that in 2025, we are telling every commercial cloud service provider that wants to sell to government, you have to fill out a spreadsheet because this memo from 25 years ago said you did. So when I think about the future initiatives in FedRAMP, like that's what we're trying to build, right? We're building that 2050. It's why we call it 20x, because originally it was going to be 2020x, because there's going to be, new every year, 2025, 2026, 2027. But we realized it's going out to 2030, it's going out to 2040. So it's just 20x. It's continuously improving this over however many years. And that's the future, right? Is we're building something now that 10 years from now, we don't want people to be talking about. We don't want it to be exciting. We don't want people to have you heard about the new improvements FedRAMP is making, because it just should be an engine that is continuously improving, continuously delivering, and it's just part of the ecosystem that we all take for granted.
Yeah.
Just like we take for granted these plans of actions and milestones, except we want FedRAMP 20x to be awesome, whereas the POAMs kind of suck.
Well, before we conclude, Pete, I just wanted to know, do you have any comments or remarks that you would like to leave with our audience?
I think the most exciting thing about FedRAMP 20x is that we're trying to address this core gap that exists in the technology and process space around cybersecurity. What I mean by that is that people have been talking for years about automation, reporting automatically, continuous monitoring, continuous authorization, all of these things. But there hasn't been a process to do that. And without an effective process to do that, there aren't tools and capabilities to do that. And FedRAMP, under the previous authorities and expectations, had kind of tried to really centralize that. And it created an environment where the government sort of continuously said, we know there are all of these problems, and we're going to try to build solutions for all of these problems. When things changed with the new memo and then the new administration, it enabled us to go the exact opposite direction, which is take all of these problems, bring them to our partners and stakeholders in industry and say, hey, you're the tech companies. You're the guys. You're the folks that develop all of this cool stuff. Can you build stuff to do this that we can use? Not as build it for us as a defense thing, but literally as a whole community, we all need these capabilities. We need tools that allow us to automate governance, risk, and compliance by creating packages, assessing configurations, building packages, deploying them, sharing those to customers. We need tools that customers can run that then consume all of those. We need an ability for different big companies to use different standards and different approaches, but someone in the middle to translate between all of those and provide that service to agencies. And we need all this to be available to private sector customers who want it too. And all of this stuff doesn't exist because for the longest time, it was kind of the government's going to figure out how to do that. So for me, that's the thing that I leave everyone with is, folks, hear about what's happening with FedRAMP 20x, and you think about modernization, and you see it as it's easy to over-index on it being about improving the process for authorizations. But that is almost a side effect. It is the outcome that we're looking for, but beyond that is the outcome of better security, improved information availability, continuous communication and delivery across all of these streams, and the ability for industry and agencies to just massively consume huge amounts of data that they're sharing between each other in order to make ongoing decisions about what software and technology they use to ensure that they're doing it right in a way that's secure. So it's not just building process, it's building an environment where technology and innovative solutions can come in to make that process a reality. And that's where we're at right now with our 20x pilot, where we have products that did not exist 6 months ago have been built or customized or developed in order to meet this need. And if we've done that in 3 months that the pilot has been running, what is this whole community going to look like in a year when all the big hyperscalers have gotten involved, when more startups have just thrown their hat in the ring based on this? It's going to look really different. And maybe we can get to those many thousands of cloud services.
Yeah, and that's going to be something that's for sure. It's going to be interesting. Well, thank you so much, Pete. I appreciate you taking out time to share all these exciting details about FedRAMP 20x and just everything going on at GSA. It's a really exciting time for sure. So thank you for taking out time to speak with me today. And I hope that you have a wonderful afternoon.
Cheers.